Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Katie, and for today's video, we are doing how to do a solo trip to Disney. So I'm really excited to make this video because I love making Disney videos. They're my favorite thing to make. But I had this idea because I did a solo trip recently and I was getting a lot of messages on Instagram about people asking questions or saying that they wanted to do a solo trip. So I just thought I would make this little like how to do a solo trip to Disney, and hopefully it helps you out if you're on the fence about doing a solo trip. Spoiler alert, you should do it. So I put a little Q&A box for anyone to ask questions about doing a solo trip to Disney on my Instagram, but I do have some questions that came through that I'll answer along the way. So a little bit about my trip. I did a solo trip to Disney World for the first time in January of this year, of 2023, so I've got my little 2023 hoodie on. I booked a 5-night with 3-park day trip. So I had PTO. I was like, I don't know what to do with it. My husband couldn't get off work. I'm just gonna end up sitting around. And then I was like, you know what? No. I want to go to Disney and my husband can't go. I'm gonna go anyway. So that's what I did. Booked it 3 weeks before I left, which was super last minute for me. So in terms of dining reservations, obviously very limited to choose from at that point. So I ended up staying at Pop Century, which is a value resort. So it was great for saving money. And someone asked on my Instagram, if you were to do another solo trip, would you pick another value resort? Yes, I absolutely would stay at Pop Century again. I don't love the idea of staying at All Stars just because you have to take the bus everywhere, but having the Skyliner access at Pop Century is so great for a solo trip because you can kind of bop around wherever you want, whenever you feel like it. And the Skyliner is really easy for resort hopping between parks, that kind of thing. So I would absolutely stay at Pop Century again if I did another solo trip. I think it's a great option, period, but also especially for a solo trip. I loved staying at Pop Century. While I was there, I did 3 park days. I decided not to do Park Hopper. So unfortunately, I love Animal Kingdom so much, but unfortunately I skipped Animal Kingdom. So I did a day in Epcot. It was Festival of the Arts when I went, so that was a great time to go, especially when there's a festival you want to check out and you've never been there before. So I loved checking out Festival of the Arts for the first time by myself. It was so much fun. And then I went to Hollywood Studios and Magic Kingdom. And then I had one day off where I didn't have any park reservations. I laid by the pool and then I did some Skyliner resort hopping. If you're interested in any of this, I did vlog the entire thing, which is another thing that I'll talk about later, but I did vlog the whole trip. So I will link my vlogs for my solo trip above. So definitely check those out if you like Disney vlogs. I had so much fun making them and had just such a great trip. So that's a little bit about the trip that I went on and kind of where my advice is coming from. Obviously, everyone's trip is going to be totally different, and that's the awesome thing about solo trips is you can make your trip whatever you want. But let's get into planning. Another question that I got was where to start, like what is the first step in planning? So with a solo trip, I think it's a little bit different than with a trip that you go on with other people, because obviously when you go with other people, the first step is, okay, well, when are we all free? When can we all get time off work and when can we go? Also, I feel like your budget is, you're not having to consider other people's budget, you're only having to consider your own. So I think the first step is always to think about your budget, because depending on your budget is gonna determine what time of year you should go. So I loved going in January. I think it's a great option. It's definitely a more affordable time to go. So I think the first step is always to determine your budget, like how much are you willing to spend, and that kind of helps you determine where you're gonna stay, when you're gonna go, how many park days you're gonna do. So I think budget is always first, and all that other stuff you can tweak and adjust to fit your budget. So as far as where I would recommend staying, my first tip is to stay on Disney property. When you're on a solo trip, you have to think about your safety, and for me personally, I feel much more comfortable staying on Disney property, but also all of your transportation is included. There's a lot of perks to staying on Disney property, and I feel strongly about staying on Disney property all the time, but especially for a solo trip, I think having all your transportation included and being able to kind of stay in that Disney bubble is so crucial. So my first tip is to absolutely splurge on staying on property. And there are, you know, of course, options for every budget. So another thing I talked about as far as your budget is how many park days are you gonna do? I think you can get away with doing a solo trip for a shorter amount of time and feel like you get as much stuff done as a longer trip with other people, because again, you don't have to consider what other people want to do. You only have to consider what you want to do. There is no Disney trip where you can do every single thing that Disney has to offer. Disney World is huge. There's so many different parks, so many different shows, entertainment, rides. There's just so many different things you can do, and every trip is going to be different. So I think ultimately it just comes down to what your schedule is looking like and how much you want to do. So mine felt like a long weekend trip, and I did a lot of relaxing while I was there. So I think you could definitely get away with doing a shorter trip than what I did. The next thing I planned when I planned my Disney trip was how I was going to get to Disney from the airport. So the Magical Express is no longer a thing. So I decided to do the Mears Connect. I just felt more comfortable taking a bus with other people than I felt taking an Uber by myself. I do think the Mears Connect was probably a more affordable option as well. If you have multiple people and you're splitting an Uber or rideshare, I think that that can be a cheaper option. But for a solo trip, I highly recommend the Mears Connect. I really enjoyed it. It was a really nice, smooth ride. It was comfortable, and the drivers were awesome. I highly recommend using the Mears Connect, especially if you're going on a solo trip. And then I did get one question about how to budget for a trip to Disney. Hi, I was wondering about the cost, like how you budgeted. Did you have a certain amount allocated to food and drinks and merch, or was it a free-for-all? That's a great question. So for my solo trip, I didn't really have a chance to put money aside because I planned it so last minute. But again, the time of year that I went, it was pretty affordable. I stayed at a value resort. One tip I do recommend for a solo trip or any trip to Disney is you can pay for your trip with Disney gift cards. So if you have any way to purchase Disney gift cards for a discount, so for example, if you have a Target Red card, you can buy Disney gift cards for 5% off. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but for a $2,000 trip, that's $100 that you're gonna save, and then you can then put that towards food. So I highly recommend doing that if you have some way to get discounted Disney gift cards. It was kind of a free-for-all, as you said, just because my trip was so last minute, but normally I do like to plan and budget and even buy Disney gift cards for buying food in the parks. I don't do gift cards for merchandise because I do get a discount. I think it's 10% off for having a Disney Visa card. So I don't do gift cards for merch because I have to pay with my Disney card to get the discount. I do normally get some Disney gift cards to budget for food, and again, that 5% off with a Target Red card, save a little bit of money there. Someone asked, do you plan on doing more solo trips or making it a yearly tradition? If you did it again, are you going to try a different month each time? Yes, I don't currently have any more solo trips planned. If I could do it every year, I totally would. That's probably not in the cards for me financially, but I absolutely do want to go back to Disney solo. I really had such a fun time, and I'll get into the pros and cons and why I liked it so much, but I would definitely go on a solo trip again. I actually really liked going in January because the crowds were low in comparison to the rest of the year. I mean, the crowds are never like none at Disney World, but it was an affordable time to go. So I would consider going back in January, but I think it would be fun to go for a different Epcot festival. Like, I think it'd be really fun to go for Flower and Garden Festival because I've never been there. I would definitely consider going back a different time of year just to experience something a little bit different. So let's talk about what to do when you're actually in Disney World on a solo trip. The biggest benefit of a solo trip is literally just do whatever you want. If you don't want to ride a single ride, then don't. If you don't want to go to a single show, don't. If you don't want to stay to watch fireworks, don't. So every trip might look different for you. So let's say you're going on a family trip coming up, but you're doing a solo trip next month. Do things that you might not normally have time to do on a trip with other people, like sit and enjoy more than you would normally on a trip with other people. So if you're someone who's not super familiar with Disney World and you're going on a solo trip, first of all, good for you. You are awesome. You can do it. But I do recommend, if you're not super familiar with the flow of Disney World or what there is to do, I would recommend checking out Mammoth Club. They're a channel here on YouTube, and they have a lot of useful information about going on a Disney trip. So I will link them in the description. I definitely recommend checking them out if you're not super familiar with Disney World. But if you are, do things you wouldn't normally do on a trip with your family. Mackenzie asked, did you feel like you needed Genie Plus? So yes. That is one of my big major tips for a solo trip. Just get Genie Plus. Especially when you're alone, nothing sounds more boring than waiting in a line. So for me personally, it was worth $15 is what it cost each day that I was there. I didn't get it when I was in Epcot because I didn't really ride that many rides. I just did Guardians. For Guardians, I did the virtual queue and I paid for a lightning lane, but I did not do Genie Plus that day. So I just didn't feel like it was really worth how many rides I wanted to do in Epcot, and Soarin' has a single rider line. So I just didn't feel like it was necessary in Epcot, but I did get it for Magic Kingdom and Hollywood Studios, and I do highly recommend it because you're by yourself. Imagine waiting in a 60-minute line by yourself. I wouldn't feel awkward. I think I would just be bored, to be honest. So I did pay for Genie Plus, and I do recommend if you go on a solo trip to budget for Genie Plus if you're gonna be doing a lot of rides. One thing I was kind of like unsure about was the eating situation. Like, am I gonna do any sit down meals? And again, I booked my trip so last minute, I didn't really have time to do advanced dining reservations, but I was on the lookout for a sci-fi dine-in reservation. I felt comfortable going there by myself because it's so quiet and everyone basically just sits there and watches the old movies while they eat. So I did feel comfortable doing that. I just couldn't get a reservation. So someone asked, how was eating alone? This was always my biggest worry. So yes, I was also worried about that. So I ended up doing a lot of quick service. I didn't feel awkward eating alone at all. I had so many pictures I wanted to edit and post on Instagram. So I was kind of just editing pictures and editing reels and stuff like that. So I kind of kept myself busy when I was sitting down, even while I was eating. So I didn't do any sit down restaurants, but I would feel comfortable doing some sit down restaurants next time, just because like after doing a solo Disney trip, I have learned that literally no one cares. And someone asked, did you have to book any dining reservations for just one person? So I didn't really join. I guess I could have joined some walk-up lists, but I just honestly didn't because I was having so much fun just kind of like bopping around. In the moment when I was there, I didn't really want to take the time to sit down and eat a meal and wait for my food. I was just kind of like go, go, go. Like, so I didn't really try to get any dining reservations, but I'm guessing for one person, it would be about the same as trying to get a table for two. Moving on to how to take pictures by yourself. So I'm gonna give you guys some tips about how I took pictures by myself. So of course, you can take a selfie. Now on the newer iPhones, you can zoom out to the 0.5 and take a selfie that way. You can get a lot of stuff in the background. I definitely did tons of selfies. I was so stressed about having to take pictures by myself and feeling awkward and people looking at me. And the funny thing is that the things that I stressed about before my trip were not an issue at all. I ended up buying this little phone stand off of Amazon. So I will link it in the description for you guys. I highly recommend. It was $6. I totally got my money's worth. It folds up really small so I can toss it in my park bag. Basically, I would just set it up on whatever I could find, most of the time a trash can, and take pictures of myself. And I use the app Lens Buddy. Basically, you can set how many pictures you want it to take. So I would set it to like 25 pictures every second. So for about 25 seconds, it's just snapping a picture every second. So you can do multiple poses. I always take pictures with the back camera instead of the front camera, so it takes a little while to set it up and make sure that you're gonna be in the frame. I was so worried about having to set up the phone stand and like taking pictures of myself, and so awkward. That was not the case at all. Again, no one cares what you're doing. Everyone is concerned with their own family, their own party. And actually, the first time I set the phone stand up to take pictures, I was so nervous. And then a girl like stopped me and was like, oh my gosh, where did you get that? I need one of those. Like, she was also by herself and she was like, where did you get that? I need one. And don't be afraid to ask people to take your picture. So especially if you see someone else who's by themselves who's taking a selfie, be like, hey, can I take a picture for you? And then when you're done, you say, hey, do you mind taking a picture for me? And honestly, it sounds weird, but like, it's really not. The worst they can say is, actually I have to run to my lightning lane or whatever. So yeah, don't be afraid to be like, hey, do you mind taking a picture of me? Let's talk a little bit about safety tips. So I was a little bit nervous about going somewhere by myself, and the nice thing about Disney is I never left the Disney bubble. I feel generally safe there. Of course, like, you should never let your guard down anywhere, especially when you're by yourself, but generally I feel safe there. I never once felt like unsafe or that somebody was like, oh, are you by yourself? Like, I never felt unsafe in any way when I was there. You should still take precautions. So a couple things I do recommend is paying extra for a preferred room. If you're staying at a resort like Pop Century, that's very big. I ended up in the furthest building, the 90s building, and it was a long walk by myself sometimes when it's dark at night. For the most part, the paths are pretty well lit, so I never felt unsafe. But if you would prefer being close to other people, close to the pool, close to the dining hall, for safety reasons, I would recommend paying for a preferred room. And a general rule of thumb is anytime you're traveling alone, even though you're in Disney, don't tell people you're by yourself. And people did ask, surprisingly. I don't think they meant it in a creepy way at all. I think they're genuinely curious about why you're by yourself. They would love to do a solo trip and want to ask you questions about it. They don't know your story. You can be like, oh, actually my husband's here, but he decided to sleep in this morning. Just have something ready, because the first time someone asked me, I was kind of caught off guard. It was like the first day that I was there and I got on the Skyliner and this family was like, oh, are you by yourself? And I was like, you know, so just have something ready to be like, oh, my husband's here, but he's like taking a nap. Social media. Social media is so much fun. I love social media. I love posting on Instagram, but I decided to not post anything on my Instagram until I was home from my trip. So I decided to do like a little recap of my trip when I got home. I do recommend that for safety reasons. Even if you delay your post by a day or two, but you're like, oh my gosh, look, I'm on a solo trip. And then 3 days later, you see someone who follows you on Instagram at Epcot, they're gonna know you're by yourself. So I didn't post anything from my solo trip until I got home. So the question everyone is asking, no, I was not bored. So I vlogged my trip, so that was really helpful in keeping me busy while I was there. I paid for Genie Plus. I didn't want to wait in line. If the line was too long for something that I didn't pay for Genie Plus for, then I just didn't ride it. But yeah, I vlogged and that kept me really busy, so I definitely didn't get bored. I just had so much fun and I really can't rave about it enough. But vlogging or editing pictures, I would edit pictures when so I did have to wait in line for a few things. Like when I did my virtual queue for Guardians, there was a very short wait. It was like 25 minutes maybe. So I was in line, but there was so much stuff to look at, so I was really looking at all the stuff. And last time I rode Guardians, I didn't really have time to look at anything around. So it's actually really fun. The queue for Guardians is very fun, but I was looking around, I was reading things, I was watching all the characters that show up, I was watching the clips that they show, I was editing pictures on my phone. So yeah, I really didn't get bored, but I also didn't really wait in lines. When you're by yourself, I feel like you have so much more time to take in everything around you. I had never been so observant of all the different posters and theming that they have in Hollywood studios than when I was by myself, because you have no one to talk to, which sounds boring, but it was a good way for me to focus on what was actually going on around me and taking in the atmosphere and all the little details that makes Disney so magical. I really spent a lot of time people watching, to be honest, and observing and taking in all the little details that are in a Disney park. And a lot of people asked, is it weird to go to Disney by yourself? No, it's not. It's not weird at all. Cast members do not blink an eye when they see someone by themselves. They have no idea what your story is. They don't know if your family is sleeping in, if your family went to a different park that day and you wanted to go back to Magic Kingdom. They don't know if you're a Disney College Program student it's your day off. They don't know if you're an annual pass holder who has a random weekday off. There's a lot of scenarios where people are in Disney by themselves and they just don't care. Someone asked, would love to hear about the benefits of solo trips regarding single rider lines, more availability for restaurants, and lightning lanes. So yes, let's do some pros and cons. Pro, you can do whatever you want. You can be very flexible. I talked about this a little bit, but yes, do whatever you want. That is a huge pro. You don't have to cater to anyone else. Another pro, single rider lines. Single rider lines are awesome. So there's not that many in Disney World, and you can look up on their website which rides have single rider lines. Definitely take advantage of the single rider lines, because for a ride that has like a 60-90 minute wait, you probably would wait like 10 minutes in a single rider line. So sometimes I use these even when I'm with other people, but single rider lines are so fun. If you are with other people, you will be separated from them. Sometimes it's worth it if you really want to go on something and you don't want to wait. Another pro, I think that solo travel is very rewarding personally, and I think it builds your confidence. Honestly, it makes you feel like if you can travel somewhere by yourself, you can do anything. So I definitely felt that when I went on my solo trip. Cons, safety. If you don't feel safe traveling somewhere by yourself, that would be a huge con if it's gonna make you nervous. There are more risks with your safety when you're by yourself. Another con is that some people might get lonely or bored. I was not one of those people, but some people might feel sad or lonely going somewhere by yourself. But again, I did not feel that way at all. And I just love Disney. I was just happy to be there. I think one of the biggest cons is if you're not super familiar with Disney or Disney World specifically, and you're going on a trip there by yourself, it can be really hard to figure things out on the fly and takes a lot of planning. So I definitely think that if you're not super familiar with the Disney World, that can be a big con for a solo trip, because you're on your own, trying to figure everything out on your own. So I definitely recommend doing a lot of research beforehand, just so that you're not really wasting your time trying to figure it out on the fly. So that is it for how to do a solo trip to Disney. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I am so happy to answer them. If you're thinking about doing a solo trip to Disney, you can do it. I really hope this video helped. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I will link my Disney solo solo vlogs above, so you can check that playlist out. I will have more Disney videos coming soon, but more on that later. If you like Disney videos, you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next vlog.